East London, 1929. 5:30 a.m. The streets are dark and quiet. Most people are still asleep. But Mary Smith is awake. She's been awake for hours, and she's carrying something unusual, a long rubber tube, a pea shooter. She approaches a row of terraced houses, stops at a specific window on the second floor, and raises her pea shooter. A quick burst of dried peas strikes the glass with a distinctive tap-tap-tap sound. Inside, a man stirs, opens his eyes, acknowledges he's awake. Mary moves on to the next house, then the next. She has dozens of clients to wake before dawn. Mary Smith is a knocker-upper, a human alarm clock, and until the 1970s in some parts of industrial England, she and people like her were the primary way working-class families got to work on time. This is the story of the knocker-uppers, the ingenious methods they used to wake Britain, and how an entire profession existed just to tap on windows before dawn. The problem: time became money. The knocker-upper profession emerged during the Industrial Revolution, when everything about work changed fundamentally. Before industrialization, most people worked in agriculture. They rose with the sun, worked according to seasonal rhythms. If you were a farmer, being precisely on time wasn't critical. Crops don't operate on schedules. But factories did. Mines did. Mills and docks and railways all demanded punctuality. If you failed to report to your duties on time, you were fined. Show up late repeatedly, you were fired. And in Victorian Britain, losing your job meant destitution. There were no unemployment benefits, no safety nets. Missing a shift could spiral your entire family into poverty within days. So workers needed to wake up, on time, every day, no matter what shift they worked, whether it was 4 a.m., 6 a.m., or midnight. The problem? Alarm clocks existed but weren't the solution. Adjustable alarm clocks had been invented by the mid-19th century, but they were still relatively expensive and, crucially, unreliable. The working class couldn't afford clocks. Even if they could, there was no guarantee the clock would work properly, especially in damp, cold homes where mechanisms might freeze or rust. So workers needed another solution, and British entrepreneurship provided one. Hire someone to wake you up. The solution? Professional window tappers. The knocker-upper profession started during and lasted well into the Industrial Revolution. It was particularly common in the northern mill towns, where people worked shifts, or in London, where dockers kept unusual hours, ruled as they were by the inconstant tides. Who became knocker-uppers? Several types of people found the job appealing. Generally, the job was done by elderly men and women who were night owls anyway and slept during the day instead, waking at about 4 in the afternoon. The profession suited people who naturally stayed awake at night. Sometimes police constables supplemented their pay by performing the task during early morning patrols. They were already walking the streets in the pre-dawn hours. Why not earn extra money waking people? Young women in the family way, pregnant women, sometimes took the job because it allowed them to work unusual hours while managing their condition. And the trade often ran in families. Mary Smith, who used a pea shooter, was a well-known knocker-upper in East London, and her daughter, also called Mary, followed in her mother's footsteps. The latter is widely believed to have been one of the capital's last knocker-uppers. In return for waking their clients, knocker-uppers were paid a few pence a week. Mary Smith earned 6 pence a week in the 1930s. Some charged 3 pence, 3 pence, while the more established knocker-uppers in expensive London areas could earn as much as half a crown, 30 old pence, from wealthier clients. It wasn't much money, but when you had 80 to 100 clients on your route, It added up to a sustainable income. The challenge, waking one without waking all. Here's the tricky part about being a knocker-upper. You couldn't just knock on the front door. If you knocked on the door or rang the bell, you'd wake the entire household. But usually only one person in that house had paid for your service. The rest of the family, children, elderly relatives, non-working spouses, were trying to sleep. And even worse, you'd wake the neighbors, for free. And once people figured out they could just listen for their neighbor's knock-up and save 6 pence a week, your business model collapses. So knocker-uppers developed ingenious solutions. The most common tool was a long, light stick, often made of bamboo. These poles could reach from street level to second-story windows. The knocker-upper would tap gently on a specific window, loudly enough to wake the client inside, but softly enough not to disturb neighbors. They used to come down the street with their big long poles, remembers Paul Stafford, who experienced knocker-uppers in 1970s Oldham. The knocker-upper wouldn't hang around either, just 3 or 4 taps and then he'd be off. We never heard it in the back room, though it used to wake my father in the front. Other knocker-uppers used different implements, soft hammers that produced a distinctive tapping sound, rattles, or fishing rod-like sticks with wire or other materials at the end. But the most creative solution? The pea shooter. Mary Smith and the art of pea shooting. Mary Smith became famous for her method. She used a long rubber tube to shoot dried peas at her clients' windows. A famous photograph shot in 1931 by John Topham shows Mary Smith on her rounds in East London, pea shooter in hand, ready to wake the working class of Limehouse. The pea shooting method was brilliant for several reasons. First, it was quiet, quieter than hammering or knocking. The tap of a dried pea on a window was loud enough to wake someone inside, but not loud enough to disturb sleeping neighbors. Second, it was precise. Mary could target a specific window from street level without needing to get close to the house. No risk of accidentally knocking on the wrong window. Third, it was distinctive. The rapping, clacking sound of dried peas against glass became Mary's signature. Her clients knew that particular sound meant it was time to get up. Mary's inventive approach even inspired a children's book by Andrea Uren, celebrating her unique contribution to this bygone trade. Mary's daughter Molly Moore claims to have been the last knocker-upper to have been employed as such. Both Smith and Moore used the same pea-shooting method, a family trade passed down from mother to daughter. The coal miner's solution. In some communities, knocker-uppers faced an additional challenge. Miners worked rotating shifts. One week, they'd need to be up at 4 a.m. The next week, 6 a.m. The week after, midnight. In Ferryhill, County Durham, miners' houses had slate boards set into their outside walls, onto which the miners would write their shift details in chalk so that the colliery-employed knocker-up could wake them at the correct time. These boards were known as knocky-up boards or wake-up slates. The miner would write something like 5 a.m. Tuesday in chalk, and the knocker-upper would check the board and wake them at the correct time. It was a practical solution to a complex scheduling problem. The knocker-upper could serve dozens of miners without needing to memorize everyone's rotating schedule. The human element. Being a knocker-upper wasn't just about tapping windows. It was about understanding people. In 1878, a Canadian journalist interviewed a well-known knocker-upper, Mrs. Waters. She'd been doing the job for 30 years in northern England, maintaining at least 80 clients. She woke as early as 2:30 a.m. in all weathers. Mrs. Waters described the different reactions she encountered. A surly or hot-tempered fellow would growl or knock things about as he came to the window to reply, and his responding rap would sound as peevish as possible. But the good-tempered risers? You could hear from his very tread that he was grateful even, and his reply tap sounded quite musical, and when he spoke and bade you good morning, it was really encouraging. Some knocker-uppers would not leave a client's window until they were sure that the client had been awakened. Others simply tapped several times and moved on, trusting their clients would get up. And in winter, when workers struggled to wake up in the dark, cold mornings, demand for knocker-upper services increased, as did their charges. Mrs. Waters used her knocker-upper income to maintain an invalid husband and afford her son's education. The profession provided women like her a significant degree of financial independence at a time when employment options for women were extremely limited. The inevitable question. Everyone always asks, but who woke up the knocker-uppers? The answer is simple. No one. Knocker-uppers were night owls who slept during the day instead, waking at about 4 in the afternoon. They worked at night when most people slept, and they slept during the day when most people worked. In a famous photograph, Mr. William Crompton of Bolton, described as the oldest of the knocker-ups who wake factory workers every morning, is shown beside an alarm clock. The caption notes, "Alarm clocks put most of the knocker-ups out of business, but Mr. Crompton, 72, survived the challenge." Strangely enough, Mr. Crompton is himself awakened by an alarm clock. The irony was not lost on observers. The slow decline. By the 1940s and 1950s, the profession had more or less entirely died out in most places. The spread of electricity and affordable alarm clocks made human alarm clocks unnecessary. But in some pockets of industrial England, the profession survived. The practice continued until the early 1970s in places like Bolton and Oldham. The last knocker-upper is believed to have retired from the job in 1973 in Bolton. For nearly 150 years, knocker-uppers had been part of British working-class life. Then, within a generation, they vanished completely, replaced by technology, by cheap alarm clocks and electric power. Charles Dickens referenced the profession in Great Expectations. It appeared in plays and films. It was documented in photographs and interviews. And then, it was gone, remembered only in history books and old photographs. What it reveals. The knocker-upper profession tells us something important about the Industrial Revolution and the working class. It shows how industrialization demanded punctuality in ways that agriculture never had. Time became money. Being late became a firing offense. It shows the ingenuity of working-class entrepreneurship. When a need emerged, people filled it. Elderly women with pea shooters, police officers on patrol. Anyone willing to wake at 2:30 a.m. could earn extra income. It shows the precariousness of working-class life. People paid 6 pence a week, money they could barely afford, just to ensure they'd wake up for work, because missing a shift meant potential destitution. And it shows how quickly professions can disappear. For 150 years, knocker-uppers were essential. Then alarm clocks improved, and within a generation, the profession ceased to exist. The final tap. So here's what happened. During the Industrial Revolution, workers needed to wake up on time or face firing and poverty. Alarm clocks were expensive and unreliable. So people hired knocker-uppers, human alarm clocks who used bamboo poles, pea shooters, soft hammers, and rattles to tap on windows before dawn. Mary Smith became famous for shooting dried peas at windows in East London. Mrs. Waters woke 80 clients in northern England for 30 years. Mr. Crompton in Bolton survived into his 70s doing the job. By the 1940s and 50s, most had vanished. The last knocker-upper retired in 1973. Today we wake to smartphone alarms, smartwatches, and a dozen backup systems. We take punctuality for granted. But for 150 years, British workers depended on elderly women with pea shooters and men with bamboo poles tapping on their windows in the dark. The tap-tap-tap of dried peas on glass, the distinctive knock of bamboo on window panes, the gentle hammer taps that meant it was time to wake up. Those sounds are gone now, replaced by digital beeps and buzzing phones. But they were once the sound of Britain waking up, one window at a time.